if at the end of this video I shut off my laptop and I go in my corner and I go on my knees and I thank God for this beautiful conversation with Richard, who is my friend. I love the entire hour with him. I love him as a person, as a friend, and I give glory to God for the beauty of insight and understanding that comes from this beautiful book. And also I thank God for the author of this book. You see what happens? You see the difference? This is
And I feel it.
Hello, everybody. This is Tom from Los Angeles, and I have a great guest today, a friend of mine who is dialing in from the UK, from England. His name is Richard Emerson. We've been chatting already for, I would say, more than a couple of years, right, Richard? Because you have a couple of podcasts going, and one in particular is about Dante, the Divine Comedy, and all of its cultural consequences and importance. And the other one is called Burning Phoenix. And maybe you could describe what Burning Phoenix is about, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor. I've been a fan of your channel for, as you say, a couple of years, ever since I discovered your first videos about Dante in English when you had the whole comedy. So that's been a huge joy and inspiration as well. And as you said, I've been working with Divine Comedy for a few years, and then also some ancient world and kind of delving into the old world from the Renaissance and backwards on its own terms and just living in that world. And now the recent project for about 3 months now is the Burning Phoenix, which is an effort to blend the new and the old and see more how the old mythology, the biblical stories, and Dante are relevant for today and how they can maybe explain some of the things that are happening today. So the phoenix is the metaphor of, so the hypothesis is that we are in a burning phoenix moment right now, with like in the Anglo-American world, West, that some things are both burning down and then some things are emerging and being rebuilt anew. And again, the phoenix was this mythological creature that every 600-700 years it burned into ashes and then it arose from the ashes. But a part of the podcast, just to the final point, is that the approach is that two things are happening at once. So it's not that the world is falling apart and it's all horrible. Like some things are burning down and some things are coming up. So that's what we try to explore on the podcast.
Wonderful. So thank you for taking the time. We always chat offline via internet, etc. And recently, maybe a month ago or so, we were chatting about different books. And you, and I'm going to be eternally grateful to you for this, you mentioned this book, which is called The Master and His Emissary by Iain McGilchrist. And since you mentioned it, the concept of a recent book about the left and the right brain hemispheres was already very appealing to me. But from the moment I started reading it, not only I fell in love with it, but there were so many things that just clicked and clacked and came together in my head from the point of view of my own understanding of the world, my own understanding of myself as well, my own biography. So I think it's not an exaggeration to say that this particular book is one of the most important in the nonfiction area, let's say, that's been published in this century at least, especially because it's a cross-area type of book. It's a book that is not specialized. It's written by somebody who understands neuroscience and also understands philosophy very well, and tries to bring them together in a fascinating way. And it's so convincing. Many years ago, reading in an Italian book the following sentence: some men are interested in things, and some men are interested in people. Okay? And when I read this sentence in a book, I thought to myself, and I never forgot this sentence because it hit me very hard. And I thought to myself, this sounds like truth. This sentence sounds really true, but at the same time, it sounds also a little bit disturbing. There's something missing behind this sentence. And McGilchrist, with this book, I believe, put the finger exactly on what is missing in this sentence. Because while it is true that some human beings are naturally more interested in things, in inanimate objects, and other human beings are more interested in relationships and people, it's not as simple as that. It's not just that one position is equally valid to the other. There is something more to say about this, to the point that ancient philosophers were right when they said that we are a social animal. So we could almost say that that person who is more interested in inanimate things, in objects, is missing out something. There's something that is lacking there, but I'm not going to anticipate. So this is my introduction, Richard, and I would love it to hear what you think about the book and maybe describe it.
I love what you're saying there. It's is this once you get familiar with that book and the understanding of how the brain works, like there's an endless kind of just flow of examples when you can start seeing it and deciphering how that sentence you described, how it works. Also because as we're going to lay out now, but it's like in some sense we have two different brains. The brain hemispheres are not two parts of one machine. They're more like two brains with different natures, and they do many of the same things, but they look at things in a different way. So as you said there, why it often can appeal to us, many of these things, for some intuitive reason, is because it resonates in how we actually think internally and how we experience our own thinking world as these two different hemispheres. So, and then as you say, that like the left hemisphere is more concerned about looking at details, building models, analyzing the world, narrowing down, and dividing things into little elements, while the right hemisphere wants to look at the big picture and takes it all more in at once and unifies things. So there is a potential conflict in how they see the world, and also there can be a conflict in who is in charge for the most. Like they work together and you use both of your brain parts or brains during the day, but very often, I mean, this is the whole the claim in McGilchrist's work is that the left brain is supposed to be a tool, a servant, a helper, the emissary, as the title plays on, and not the master. The right brain should be the master, but the left hemisphere wants to be the master. And then increasingly over the last 500 years, it has become the dominant force in our thinking, and also that is reflected in society and culture. And then it's a self kind of reinforcing process, which is again the claim that is very damaging, and it creates a kind of machine-like world for us to live in. So
let's clarify very well, right? Because this is somebody who hears this. I think immediately their mind could go back to a lot of these pop and mainstream ideas of left and right brain, and all this might sound a little like an approximation, and saying, well, but really, don't we just use our whole brain every time that we do any mental activity? And this is precisely what the author of the book says in the introduction. He says, yes, we do. Every single mental activity that a healthy person does every single day involves the entirety of our brain. So there's no doubt about that. We're not talking about two separate things or what kind of fantasy, but the two hemispheres have been proven to be physiologically, neurologically, and even chemically different one from the other. There are some specific differences and not only similarities. Therefore, this book focuses on what are these differences, correct?
Yes, indeed. And by the way, I agree very much what you said in the beginning, that it's one of the most important books from the last century, maybe the last 5 centuries, in my view. It's really one that will perhaps stand out in the kind of the bigger 2,000-3,000 years of tradition as well, because it gives us an insight that we didn't have
become a classic
before. Absolutely. Yes. I think Aristotle would have been completely in love with this if he had been able to read this. But also, as you said, some of these caveats that McGilchrist himself always goes through whenever he is presenting his work, that this popular psychology pop sci version from 50 years ago was not correct. So he made a long list in the beginning of the book, that the left brain is logic, right brain is feeling, left brain is fact, right brain is imagination, and there's a long list of knowing, believing, and safe and risk-taking, all these pairs, but they are not correct. The only thing of this long list, it says, is that the left brain is detail-oriented and the right brain is big picture-oriented, which is true.
Yeah.
But then again, as you said, we use both our brains, and what is very fascinating is that the more you get familiar with his work and understanding also both how you can look at cultural history or any field of knowledge or your own life history as well, that you can see how, if you take, for example, philosophy or also religion, for example, or art, that they both engage in this, but they do it in very different ways. So then you get increasing an understanding that even if you do things that are often seen to be right hemispheric, you can still do it with your left hemisphere and think you're doing it in the same way, but you're actually doing it in a different, more kind of artificial, constructed way, and then arguably a much more reduced way. It's a kind of reductive way with the left hemisphere.
Yeah. Now you said it very well. So again, I don't want to sound over enthusiastic, but I am absolutely over the moon that I found out about this particular work, and I never found anything as convincing as this, because it doesn't only create a completely coherent picture of our brain processes, but also, and maybe even more, the proof is outside in our external world, in how we have created a world during history, century after century. We have created a society and a world for ourselves that reflects this duality and this asymmetry that we have in our head, right? One of the interesting questions that McGilchrist asks in the book at the very beginning is this: why is the brain an organ that exists only to make connections? Why is it divided? Why is it divided in two? And why is it asymmetrical in so many measurable respects? There seems to be, with evolution, this move towards keeping these two hemispheres separate from each other.
So he often makes the point that you can think of a bird trying to, because this separation of two chunks of neurons is all the way back to the trilobites, to the earliest kind of insect-like animals, and it's in every animal they have two hemispheres. But he uses the image of a bird trying to eat and to kind of find its lunch, but not becoming somebody else's lunch. So you need to focus on finding seeds and picking them up and kind of eating, but also have a predator detection. So you keep like an open, there's awareness and perception
Alertness, yes.
Alertness. And those two modes of attention are almost opposite, like narrowing down on a specific thing and then keeping open to anything that can be around you. So that is one of the strongest hypotheses in terms of the reasoning for why we need two different brains that have different ways of attending to the world. And then, as you say, you have the corpus callosum, and so much of this research is based on very almost like crude empirical data, like people having strokes in one or the other hemispheres, or if you split the brain, as to do with epilepsy patients, you can also see the effects of it. So you can very much experiment on people, even through, and like that you can also they have different techniques to numbing one of your brain hemispheres, and then you can see how people describe the world, how they can draw, how they copy if they want to draw something, and also
these descriptions change in a spectacular way, right? It's almost as if the same person has two worldviews in its own head.
There's so many fascinating examples. Like people, if they have a split brain, they can take, if they want to choose like the outfit for the day, they go into the like their closet, the wardrobe, and pick out an outfit, and then the other arm puts it back and chooses another outfit, and that is because the brain hemispheres, the two brains are in conflict, so
Yeah. So
they have different
you
interests.
you rightly mentioned the birds example, because I think it's like the perfect place to start with, because
Hmm.
the matter is so complex that if we think about a brain that is a little bit less complex than the human brain, uh, it's perfect. Let's take a bird. And
Hmm.
so, going back to the example of the bird, their alertness, they're being careful about a hawk that could come and eat them,
Hmm.
is controlled by their left eye,
Yeah.
which is connected crossed with
Yeah.
their right hemisphere.
Yes.
And their precision eating with their beak on the ground is controlled and grounded in the left hemisphere,
Yeah.
right? So if we just think about that, and then we try to imagine what it means for higher and more sophisticated brains,
Yeah.
the basic difference remains the same for us. The basic difference is right there. We have our right brain that focuses on the big picture,
Hmm.
on the whole of things, or the broadest possible imaginable thinking that we do. And the left hemisphere that focuses on how something works, the details, the breaking down of a mechanical process, of an engineering process.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also a tendency, one of those metaphors is that to mistake the map for the territory, for the landscape, because the left brain operates just with maps all the time. It can't really see the landscape. It just sees the map that it creates in his head.
It's a
And
representation. Yes.
exactly. So and like it can be kind of almost deceptive or elusive, this thing, because you can think you have the big picture in your left brain. You can make a model, and then the left brain just sees the model and disregards everything else and believes that the model is reality. So this is
Yeah.
the big warning that McGilchrist comes with through his work, is that the left brain is deceptive, and we think we're using the right brain sometimes and having the big picture, but we are actually not. And then it
Yeah.
could be seen in many ways, because if there's a contrast or like a discrepancy between what you actually perceive and how the left brain is presuming that the world what is like, people will react often with confusion, aggression, and also especially because the left brain is, most of the emotions are in your right brain, but aggression and anger is in the left brain. So if these things doesn't work, or if you start poking at people's models of the world, so now it's only at a much higher level than kind of how people perceive the world at large, or how they perceive cultures or societies or people, for example. If you start poking at kind of these axioms or the kind of the assumptions in their models, people get often very angry, because it kind of shakes the whole worldview of the left brain.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then
Um,
and this,
can
you
I
can
ask
see it
you?
everywhere. Yeah.
Yes. Could I ask you, Richard, to describe this experiment? As you said, some patients, maybe they had an accident or a stroke, and so they can only use one of the two hemispheres. And
Yeah.
can you just describe the one where you could really see that with only having the left hemisphere, you could see only the brain could only see one side of reality, literally one side, while only with the right the whole was still intact.
Yeah, you think about the drawings when people are trying to
Yes,
copy. Yeah. So I guess maybe if you want to put the illustrations up later, but what
yes,
you see is that uh, if you have a damage to your right brain, your ability to perceive reality is distorted, like fundamentally. So when people then are trying to copy and draw something, they often just draw half of what they see, and then they insist that it's everything. They also, if you compose like an age with e letters, where you have like a 4 with 8 digits, they can't see the overall shape. They will just see, so if you have all these e's that are kind of lined up in an overall age, they would just see a bunch of e's and not the age. They're not capable. The left brain isn't capable of seeing the overall shape at all. And you have the dog, this Dalmatian dog as well. There's this kind of black and white dotted picture where the right brain will see, oh, here's the shape of a dog walking in a park or like in the street, but the left brain just can't. It just sees a bunch of dots. If you lose your right brain in like if you have a severe stroke, you won't be able to see the world properly anymore. But if it is in the left hemisphere and you still have your right hemisphere, you will experience the world normally, but you will have trouble with using the scissors or maybe kind of a key in the keyhole. Like everything like technical will be problematic. So that's
Yeah. I find it so unbelievable, even just the fact that our conscience can survive in only half of our brain. I remember,
yeah.
just thinking when I found this out, I thought, okay, so then the immediate consequence of this is that nature has given us two brains. Because if I lose half of it and I still retain a certain consciousness, a sense of myself, just having half of it, no matter if it's the left or the right, then it's really as if each of us has two brains, and obviously they are integrated. They are when we are healthy, they work together. You can look at it as one single brain, but physiologically, it's two of them.
Yeah.
This brings up not only very interesting and crucial, socially crucial differences in worldview, because McGilchrist says each of the hemispheres has a different worldview, but also, maybe more importantly, they can come in conflict with each other. And these conflicts are, for the most part, not, let's say, not bubbling up to the surface of our consciousness. They happened a little below. But I have to say, this is one of those books where almost every 5 or 10 pages, I was thinking, I knew this. I knew this was true, but I never found it as well articulated. I never found the source of this intuition that I had. That's what is so enthusiastic. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about this one.
Yeah, I had the same. I also, by the way, I saw the book, like some book reviews again on Amazon. He has like tens of thousands of them, but that exact thing is repeated over and over. People like, I knew this. I've always known this intuitively inside myself and how I see the world, but now it's like it's laid out in a scientific way, which is very interesting. There's another aspect with this book. Like his work is to a large extent left hemisphere based, so it's a bit technical, it's a bit scientific for some people, but it's really worthwhile the effort just to read one non-fiction book, one prose book about this, because it just changes the way you see the world and understand yourself and people and the culture. But also this thing with two hemispheres, there's a little bit, what should you call it? There's another point that it might also go really, really deep into ontology as well, like the structure of being in itself. That we have these two brains also reflect something much deeper about just the cosmos in itself and being, and that is reflected into our brains. Which is, if you want to go deeper into metaphysics, there's also his insights. They apply everywhere. So it's
yes, absolutely. And this is the part of the book that is, I think, more delicate. And I hope that I can do a good job in expressing and conveying this, because we're talking about a 600 pages book. So we're trying to summarize. And by the way, you and I are thinking to add some more videos in the future about this one. So we don't need to pack everything today, right? So I think to summarize what we said so far, we could, using other words, assign the term context to the right brain and abstraction to the left brain. This is what the author says here. I'm reading from page 49. He says, anything that requires indirect interpretation, which is not explicit or literal, that, in other words, requires contextual understanding, context, depends on the right frontal lobe for its meaning to be conveyed or received. Okay, I wrote huge on my book. I knew it next to this sentence, because on the other side, the left hemisphere will identify by labels rather than by context. For example, identify that it must be winter because it's January, not by looking at the trees covered in snow. Okay, so the difference that has always been known, even before these studies, these modern studies, is that our language is seated in the left brain. Now, this historically seemed to be such an advantage that some scientists started to talk about the right hemisphere as kind of the dum-dum of the pair, because the right hemisphere doesn't have the terms, the language that the left hemisphere has. But in reality, says the author, and I completely agree, is actually the opposite, not in the sense that the left brain is dumb, because it's not. Both of them are very important and they have to work together in order to build the human person. But in the sense that context has to come before labels and abstractions and representations. Just in that sense, the right hemisphere has to be the master and the left hemisphere has to be the emissary, or in other sense, and so when I read this passage, I thought to myself, I thought immediately about scriptures and the Bible, and how if we look at the Bible with a left hemisphere description, literal, detailed breakdown type of approach, the Bible will never make any sense, which is, interestingly, the first impression that the Bible made on St. Augustine. If you remember in the Confessions, St. Augustine picked up the Bible for the first time, and then he almost slammed it down, disappointed. He said, "What is this? It's a complete mess. It's incoherent." That's what he said, right? When he was very young, because he was coming from a philosophical habit of thinking, which is in itself very left brain type of thinking.
Yep.
For example, in a conversation with an atheist friend, my atheist friend will tell me, "Oh, but how can you be so stupid to believe this thing and this thing? Because in the Bible, it says that your God does this terrible thing." Okay. And my usual thought, or maybe response to that, is the way to read the scriptures is in the context. So I can say sometimes the scripture uses needs a lot of contextualization to be understood. Sometimes the scripture needs a lot of metaphors to express these things. And so my atheist friend will say, "Oh, metaphors. Okay, so if it's metaphors, then we agree because it's all fake, it's all fiction, right?" But actually, it's the other way around, because what my friend does not understand is that in the metaphor, there is more truth than in the words taken one after the other, because metaphors are the real language of the right brain. It's not true that the right brain doesn't have a language. It does, but it's not a language made of words, and it's not a linear language. It's a language that is broader, that is more about the context, and it doesn't look for precision. It doesn't look for accuracy. This is why the Bible speaks in a language that is the right brain language.
Even Aristotle said you can only go to the level of precision that is appropriate for the specific topic or subject. Like it depends on what you're talking about, how precise you can be. So this has been established like in Greek philosophy. But metaphor is very interesting because a friend of mine calls it just data compression in a metaphor. But it's also, there's so much packed into a metaphor, and as you said, the language, like poetry and metaphor, is the language of the right hemisphere, but the left brain doesn't understand this at all. So if people, again, like if they have a stroke in the right hemisphere, and you say to them like, "Oh, it was a dark day for Thomas," then they would think like, "What was he inside in a dark room? Was there was there's some eclipse for the sun or something?" There's are not able, and also humor, by the way, the left hemisphere doesn't understand humor. So, but metaphor, this is another thing McGilchrist has been kind of fighting against for well 40 years or so, that when you make something explicit, you reduce it enormously sometimes. and then there's more truth in the metaphor. Or like I often use this the story about the Icarus, the little boy flying too high towards the sun.
Oh yes, yes.
And it's like there's a timeless story about overconfidence, about not acknowledging your own limitations, your own competence, and then the consequences. And in that little story, there's more packed into that. Or the Tower of Babel is another one, like the pride of humans, which is in many ways like a very precise left hemispheric warning, that because this is what the left brain does. So there are so much more packed into these stories than what you can make explicit in prose left hemispheric language. Like you can write pages and pages, but it's not the same. There are deeper truths in it. That's the whole idea of symbols in itself. Like they are, like they point us towards something transcendent, or something that we can't word them precisely without reducing them. So and again, that is, like this is the whole Dante world as well. Like this is the right hemisphere is very happy in this realm of metaphors and poetic descriptions, and it's also then it contains much more wisdom. It is just a much wiser, and has in a sense a different kind of intelligence maybe, but like then it is more capable of understanding the big picture.
Precisely, and I love the fact that you brought up Dante before I did, which is a record. Thank you, Richard. But it's a perfect example of somebody who, when he decided to move from writing Il Convivio to writing the Divine Comedy in poetry, something must have clicked in his brain, and he must have understood that that poetry is a tool to access a level of truth that with a simple linear prose you cannot access. And that's how well integrated his brain must have been, not only his, but many people of his times, to the point that when we talk about truth today, unfortunately, too often we are simply limited to the truth of the left brain. So if you can put a string of words to that truth, and if the left brain can understand it, it's true. If you cannot, then it's not true. But this is the worldview according to the left brain, because and it's very limited. That's where things like rationalism, so giving too much importance to reason, or scientism, giving too much importance to science, and living inside the cage built by science are about, right?
Yeah. It's also like the Hall of Mirrors is a recurring also sort of idea, metaphor, let's say, for the left hemisphere, that it creates a hall of mirrors, and it just looks at itself within that, and it's trapped in it. But that also gives the left brain a like very high level of confidence. It feels very sure of itself because it disregards anything that doesn't fit its own model. And therefore it has removed all uncertainty, all ambiguity. It has total control, and it feels powerful, and also then very, very confident. So
yeah. And there is a whole section about philosophy, which is, I think, wonderful, because even without being a philosopher, or having studied a little bit of philosophy, I can understand that the author makes the case that ancient philosophy, ancient was really more open to this truth, to the fact that truth is to be found outside of the constraints of the left hemisphere and the word by word. In fact, the basic tenet is that philosophy, in order to reach truth, has to get out of itself. It has to break the barriers that philosophy itself is building, and understand where it's coming from, which is fundamentally the body. If you don't consider the body, if you don't consider the brain, where philosophy is coming from, you're not gonna achieve the truth.
Yeah, you have this wonderful saying, philosophy begins and ends in wonder, and that encapsulates so much of how the hemispheres should work as well. That you can look out, like you can look, like I've been looking at the night sky here a lot lately, which is it just fills me with awe and wonder every time. And also going, like looking at the mountains, just feeling nature. So if you start with that, and then you can start philosophizing with your left hemisphere and kind of finding details and try to analyze and understand it better. But then you should kind of get back into the awe and the wonder of it all. And then this is also technically how it should work with the two hemispheres, as McGilchrist describes that. You should perceive things with your right brain. It goes over to the left brain that kind of dissects it. Oh, sorry, and evaluates and builds some models that might be helpful for remembering things or for understanding certain aspects or predict things, for example. But then these models should go back into your right hemisphere again and be integrated into a new and richer whole of the right hemisphere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
a new
exactly.
overall picture. But what's
Yeah.
happened then, he says, in the last 500 years is that it just stays in the left brain. And then you build models and you just see the models. You don't integrate them back
Right.
again.
So I want to ask you a question about this, Richard, because this is where it becomes really, really interesting, right? Let's make clear that McGilchrist, he's not a particularly religious person. He's not talking to defend, he doesn't have an agenda. He just wants to understand the topic of left and right brain.
Mhm.
So the question is, given this difference and admitting the existence of these crucial differences between the two hemispheres, how is it that today some people think more in a, you could say, using the left side of the brain, and some people are more on the right side? Of course, maybe naturally or genetically, because there must be an inclination. But can you talk a little bit about that and how, because I have friends, or even in my family, I know about people who their entire worldview is a left brain worldview, and some other people who see more the big picture and in a way that is much more integrated. So how can you describe that?
There's the very big question, like, how do we get here? He traces this back to, like, we had like the Renaissance was this perfect balance culturally. It's so beautiful to, if you look at like Masaccio, like these early paintings where they suddenly put more perspective, like they calculate perspective but still make beautiful paintings. So this art and sciences mix. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the biggest one of all time, is very much both brain and using the both brains. But then gradually it's become more and more left brain dominated. And there could be many, many reasons. Well, first of all, it seems to be like a slippery slope. Once you start tilting more towards the left brain and give it more control, it starts to reshape the world around you and your thinking and your schedule, your habits, your inputs. And then it just keeps going more and more into this artificial hall of mirrors of models of the left brain again. And it mocks and shuts out the right brain, and it doesn't like it, in large part because the left brain doesn't understand the right brain. And it's almost like I would say like it's a jealousy thing, but there is something that the left brain, it has a problem. This is like one of the countless like perspectives on this, but the left brain doesn't understand the relationship properly between the two brains. The right brain does. The right brain understands the left brain, but the left brain doesn't understand the right brain. So,
which is something that I find in reality, in my reality. I see that more right brain people have the bandwidth of view to include, to see what's happening when somebody is being too literal, too defined, and left brain, like you say, in their approach to things. While if somebody is looking at the world through that left brain prism, will not accept the right brain view. I think the author says it's a either or for the left. I do not accept a different worldview from that point of view.
Yeah, so it's the arrogance of the left brain there, and it again, this overconfidence, and it feels so self-assured in its own view that it's easy to mock the other one. I mean, you could also trace this back when we mentioned Dante, but like you can see what has been over and over in like thousands of years of tradition, the idea of hubris, pride versus humility. So the right brain is humble by nature. It it's always like, well, maybe this is true, but maybe I don't understand all of it, and maybe there's some other things and perspectives I haven't taken into consideration yet. So it's kind of by nature a bit more careful about being categorical and being conclusive. And then if you create a culture which is very much fond of the left hemispheric world, then that would be seen as as not a positive trait to have, or to kind of be in that mode too much. So but this idea with the pride, I mean, this is it's the source of all the sins of all the vices in the medieval and ancient cosmologies as well. And it is, again, back to precisely, this is the temptation that the left hemisphere can give you: short-term feeling of power, control, and success. And it's also always helpful to remember that the last 400 or 500 years of the scientific age and revolution has been a tremendous success as well. So the left brain has for a long time just, maybe even in moments of self-doubt, if it's capable of it, would say, yes, but we still have all these technological advances and medical advances, and we have much more prosperous and safe societies, arguably.
Yeah.
But so it will be like, maybe I'm wrong, but the evidence looks clear that I am right.
Yeah.
So we might be back to the Phoenix thing. We might be at this point, the last decade or two, that we see that the limitations are becoming a real problem.
Right. So, and to be completely clear, there is no call for devaluing of the importance of the left brain, because, again, the point is a better integration. That's what the point is. A much better integration, because when it comes to reason and rationality, for example, the author says, despite the right hemisphere's important role in emotion, because we know that empathy and emotion are grounded in the right hemisphere, okay? The popular stereotype that the left hemisphere has a monopoly on reason, like the view that it has a monopoly on language, is mistaken. He says that there is reasoning of different kinds, and is really on the more explicit reasoning that is on the left side, but more implicit, almost silent reasoning always happens in the right side, in the right hemisphere. Going back to Dante, Virgil, who at a certain point of the trip, of the journey, has to disappear, because he represents that type of explicit reasoning, that type of reasoning in words, reasoning in logic sentences, and it can take you to a certain point, but after a certain point, there is a lot more truth to be discovered. There is a lot more truth to be enjoyed, to be discovered, and to be known, that type of explicit reason cannot take you to, is unable to take you to.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're bringing in Virgil and Dante again. So, because it's incredible. First of all, it's incredible how Dante is describing everything about the two hemispheres 700 years ago. And it's just so, it's so insightful in how the brain works, like Dante's own self-insight into his own brain machinery, or like the more organic one of the right hemisphere, is unbelievable how he could have had that level of just sensitivity to his own like inner life. So, but just like with Virgil, so like you can see gradually his limitations as the limitations of the left hemisphere. Like in Circle 8, when they meet the demons, one of the first with Virgil is just tricked by the demons. Because, and this is also so interesting, because it's the psychological current research is showing
exactly the same.
But,
yes.
Yeah, because what this Malakoda, the head demon, is doing is that he says 2 or 3 true things, and then he says a lie at the end. And the left brain can't detect the lie at the end. If you say something true, so you have another like example of right hemisphere deficits, that if you say to a person that so there is like it's we say it's minus 10 degrees in Sahara. Does it snow in Sahara? Is there snow in Sahara? They will say yes, even if there isn't snow in Sahara. But then you just made a proposition, and then the left brain says, well, it says that it's minus 10 degrees, so it follows from the one sentence to the next that okay, then it's no Sahara, but even if it's not true
Yeah.
in the reality. But the left brain doesn't, it just looks at those example facts and doesn't really understand context or relation to reality in that sense.
What I'm really shocked about, what I'm really surprised about, is that in reading this book, I came in thinking, okay, so on the right hemisphere, we have our empathy, and all of our better emotions, best emotions like love, empathy, charity, are grounded in the right hemisphere, okay? Because then we have anger on the left side. And I have faith in a religion, Christianity, that says that God, which is the utmost truth, is equal to love. God is love. Okay.
Mhm.
So I went, by reading this book, I went from thinking, yeah, this is what my religion says, and this is what Christianity says, but obviously in a context of very different religions that, and everybody has their own take. Two, now I'm thinking, actually, no, this is not only a religious truth, this is a fundamental fabric of reality,
Mhm.
our reality. Our reality is made in a way that what is utmost true and utmost truth, this is, take it as my interpretation of the book, of course, yeah. And so, what is the highest that we can aim to, and the highest truth that we as human beings can understand, comes really from the right side, from the side of empathy, and ultimately from love.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, uh, he's not religious. He's not, but he is. He suggests strongly that a sense of the sacred is necessary to maintain the overall balance over time. He mentions different sources of stimulating and using your right hemisphere, but this idea of like the humility and the sense of something sacred and also love is something that is uh, perhaps the strongest way of stimulating and making this balance right, and then also putting the right brain on top as the master again. So I mean, it is fascinating how you can see a technical, scientific, medical description of this, and then see the theological suggestions in both like pride, humility, or like divine versus the Luciferian like impulses as well, like that. It matches 100%. So you,
Yeah,
even
this is
from a sacred perspective, sorry, from a secular perspective, it is fascinating to see how it
yeah,
matches.
this is a way to bring really everything together. I've always thought, just as a rough intuition from my side, that the real Rosetta Stone of the human experience is the brain, and that's the Rosetta Stone, because whether you're speaking about psychology or philosophy or science or religion, everything, let's say, the crucial key to bridge one to the other, to the other, to the other, is in the brain.
Mm.
And not understanding this is a huge limitation, is a huge limitation. This is why I think this is a message that should be really broadened and
Abs- yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So I think he's been, I guess, as he says in the book, that he expected it to be interesting for a small group of neuroscientists or psychiatrists, but it's been massively more popular and had a much bigger reach. But I often have the sense that it really reaches scientific types, left hemispheric types, and people who are stuck in their left brain and can't get out of it, but they want they want help, and then they find this book, and then they kind of get a clear description of what is happening in their, like, they've been, their own minds have been hijacked by their left brain and they can't get out of it. He often mentions four ways to use your right hemisphere, which is nature and culture and the body and religion. The body is a peculiar one because the your image, like the wiring for the body image, is in your right brain. So if people have strokes again, they might not recognize their body as a whole anymore. So you have like Oliver Sacks wrote this book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, one of my favorite books. There's absurd examples of kind of psychiatric cases. But
Yeah.
but then sometimes people can wake up and then they can find a foreign leg in their bed, and they try to throw out the leg of the bed, and they think it's like, oh, there's a leg in my bed, and it's their own, but they don't. The structure, wired structure in the right brain is damaged, so then you don't recognize the whole of it. The same with faces as well. So you can't see. You're gonna see. There's a condition there as well that you see faces as kind of Picasso faces, with just kind of jumbled elements all over the place, because you can't grab it as a whole. You say one eye and one. So, yeah. So that is the body part. But so here's the excerpt. So he says, since the Industrial Revolution, but particularly in the last 50 years, we have created a world around us which, in contrast to the natural world, reflects the left hemisphere's priorities and its vision. Today, all the available sources of intuitive life, so this is the stuff that should stimulate and the right hemisphere, the natural world, cultural tradition, the body, religion, and art, have been so conceptualized, devitalized, and deconstructed or ironized by self-consciousness, explicitness, and the systems of theories used to analyze them, that their power to help us beyond the hermetic world of the left hemisphere has been drained from them. So he just describes here those sources of balancing like inputs or stimuli, and then what has happened, that they have been conceptualized and devitalized. So it's not that the left brain has shut out, for example, religion or culture, but it has conceptualized it and made it abstract, as you said beautifully earlier, and then it becomes another left hemispheric hall of mirrors. It's not the real thing.
Yeah.
So you start looking at art that just locks you into a left brain prison.
This actually reminds me of something that an old Italian priest used to tell me, which is exactly to this point. He was saying, you can read a lot of theology, and while you're reading theology, you're doing a good thing. But remember, there's always a little devil who is sitting next to you, is being quiet, is not doing anything. It doesn't distract you. It lets you read theology. But if in the moment when you start praying to God, then the devil starts jumping all over the room, up and down, and he calls 7 more devils, and they will start trying to distract you, because that's the difference, because that's when you are fully engaged.
Yeah, that is beautiful. You could see it partly then as that is the left hemisphere trying to, with the little demons, like, no, I want to be in charge. Don't let the other one have the hand on the steering wheel.
It is not far-fetched at all to link some of these concepts, some of these personas of the demons or the devils, to some of the type of conflicts that the left hemisphere creates towards the right one. It's not far-fetched at all.
Oh no. And that is, again, like, if you talk about like why it's such a great book, and why it's so, like, the more people read it, the better it is, because it helps with self-understanding, and it can be a really therapeutic book for many people to read as well, I think, because again, our environment, like socially and architecturally, is so tilted, and technologically more and more and more, with like the phones just programming us with just pure left hemispheric like fantasies.
Or think about children, how children in schools are less and less able to recognize faces. He said here. The number of Asperger.
It's very concerning.
Yes.
They don't have, like, they don't develop the right hemisphere, and as you say, that they can't recognize emotion in faces, because they just don't have training for it. It's just a face.
Yeah. So, and it's a world, it's a society, let's say, where this approach to things is constantly reinforced and encouraged. The more I was reading the relationships between our consciousness and the left and the right hemisphere, the more I found concepts that are ancient within Christian theology.
Yeah.
Another example is the concept of the Trinity. The concept of the Trinity, which the left brain hates because, oh my God, is it one or is it three? Oh, you're stupid because you don't understand that one is not three. No, I understand that one is not three, okay? But listen for a second. Our nature does not start as a lonely being. Our nature is in relationship. The ground of our existence is interrelational. In fact, we are not initially separated. Even when it comes to growing up as a baby, as a child, we create our own sense of self only thanks to the relationship with others, not by ourselves. So it's this intersubjectivity that is at the very ground, at the very base of the human being. And so it's more correct to talk about God, according to Christian theology, as a relationship of lover, loved, and the love that is in between, God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, rather than simply one thing that is separate from everything else. To me, this makes absolute sense.
There's something fascinating about like the one and the many, and how he has done some work on that as well, how the left and the right brain see that idea differently. And then again, as you're laying out there beautifully, is that the right brain understands this, but the left brain doesn't understand.
But wouldn't this unlock and untangle a lot of conversations that we have between religious people and atheistic people? Even,
absolutely.
You don't have to change your opinion, but this is the basis of it.
Yeah. So one of the practical applications of his work is, like in my view, and he says it himself as well, that you can detect excesses of the left hemisphere. So you can actually go through like a field like philosophy or theology or religious discussions, and you can say that these kinds of argumentations are left hemisphere excesses. They're just not, they don't correlate to reality. They don't have a context. They're just like, they're not integrated full lines of argument even. So absolutely, that's one of the gifts of his work.
And what makes it maybe a little bit more complex is the fact that in the world, we have different cultures. And now you and I are focusing on the Western culture and maybe even more on the Anglo-Saxon culture. But, even within our world, I am very familiar with the Mediterranean culture, Southern Italy, Greece, Turkey. These are more, in a certain sense, mindful type of, overall, I'm generalizing, right? But overall, while if we move towards the Anglo-Saxon world, it's a little different, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I agree. So it's this is another big topic, as I say. It's even embedded in language. It's like the English language is arguably more left hemispheric than Italian. Italian is more both hemispheric, also because it has concepts that are stimulating like the right hemisphere more. Even like if you just say buona giornata, buongiorno, it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's more like the experience of the day, and the other one's a bit more technical description of the day, which is one of those just the two hemispheres preferences of how you see the day. Is it a continuous flowing experience of life, or is it just like a block on your calendar? So that's but you have countless of this. You also have in Italian, you have like sometimes you can have so I'm telling you, but like it's your language, but it's but you will have for bones, in the plural of bones, have both a feminine or masculine plural form.
Yeah.
And that is because one refers to it as just many elements, and the other one refers to it as a whole.
Oh yes. Ossi e ossa.
Esatto, yes. So I was stunned by seeing like it's embedded in the Italian language with I mean, conjunctivo can also be seen as the subjunctive, could also partly be seen as something more like that it's not descriptive, it's more hypothetical than descriptive. So but anyways, if you speak Italian, you do get a different kind of brain balance just using the language.
Yeah.
But I also, like, jokingly, it's like, since I lived a few years in Italy, like Florence for 2 years and traveled for 10, 15 years now, if you want a more right hemispheric culture and society, you can just go to Italy for a few weeks, and then you can you can see how to say it. You can see some of the trade-offs. Like I love it more than anything. It's my deepest passion is living and being in Italy and
But but
Italians.
then,
But
to be fair, there are cultures in the world that are probably even more well integrated from this point of view, left and
mm,
right. Think
mm,
about Africa, and think about how the dance and the music is in certain populations.
mhm,
I'm a terrible dancer, for example, so I'm Italian and at a
mm,
certain level, but the author also in the book says how the fact that music in ancient times was so central in our life, in our social life, and
mm,
now it's almost seen as a aside thing, that a secondary thing.
yeah,
Same thing with religion. So there is, at a societal level, like you say, like the author says, a tilting.
mm,
We have to, as a collective group, we are not in the center anymore of what the center is supposed to be for the human being. We are a little bit off,
mm,
and this is because of the uh, supremacy of the left brain,
mm,
not only on the individual level but also on the collective level.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's again like the structure of the book for, again, for like people if they're curious about it. Like the first half of the book is neuroscience describing how the brain works. The second part is looking at cultural history and how this has been played out since the ancient Greeks, and and how this seems to go in kind of waves almost, that you reach the perfect balance, but then you tilt too much um, off balance into the left brain. But this is one of the things. So back to my little phoenix idea, that I see so much potential in his book. Like you can see, sometimes it's a bit kind of negative, pessimistic. Some of the things he's writing about, but the potential here is enormous, both like on an individual level, but also like this idea of rebalancing into a new renaissance.
So
Is
yeah.
we kind of have if not the recipe for it, we have actually a really precise tool now, technical tool to as an element of trying to kind of make this process perhaps kind of starting a path towards it. So
Yeah, so you're touching on probably the most crucial and maybe let's say solution-oriented point here, because we have been describing a bit of a problem, which is this tilting, this not being in the perfect axis as a society. Now, we should probably bring it back to the individual and say, very simply, I'm going back to the example of the old priest and the little devil. While we are reading a book is a very linear mental activity, and so the preponderance is still left brain, even if you activate your right as well, of course. Um, Speaking with each other in words and describing a book and describing the concepts of the book, even if we engage our whole brain, it's still fundamentally a left brain activity. This is why the little demon, the little devil, is still quiet and is not bothering us. Now, if at the end of this video I shut off my laptop and I go in my corner and I go on my knees and I thank God for this beautiful conversation with Richard, who is my friend. I loved the entire hour with him. I love him as a person, as a friend, and I give glory to God for the beauty of insight and understanding that comes from this beautiful book. And also I thank God for the author of this book. You see what happens? You see the
mm,
difference?
mm.
This is
And
the,
I feel it. So,
this is
the
the
world
real difference.
changes.
Yes, the
Mm,
world becomes something different. We engage our main centers of the right brain, our heart, in a sense,
yeah,
and that's where we all should be.
yeah. But yeah, and thank you. That was very beautiful. People sometimes wonder about like how practical, like what to do then. Like, okay, if we understand this. So, but I will again say like just reading the book is step one. That's kind of then you kind of you've taken a huge step towards understanding yourself better. But then practical kind of activities. McGilchrist doesn't want to say anything about this himself, but I made a list. I made a podcast episode about this. Like, so what you said there was kind of stronger than any of the things I have here. But things could be like spend more time in nature. That's a good thing. That kind of works on you, whether you like it or not. Almost, it's just like your body will respond to be in nature, in its living organic environment that we come from. So that works. Reducing online time drastically, as I said, that's one thing. Getting
Absolutely.
offline, because that's a continuous left hemispheric thing. And then just for like simple 3-point list, and the last one was like, do one of these: play an instrument for 20 minutes, read and contemplate old mythology and symbolism, do 20 minutes of, for example, Tai Chi, like Chinese body movement, do something creative like writing a poem, a little story, make a painting, or compose a little song, all of which stimulates the right hemisphere. And can start a path towards a more balanced Renaissance mind outlook. or make a prayer in the way that Tom just showed us. That's even better.
But you know what, my friend, we're gonna no doubt we're gonna record some more thoughts and another exchange about maybe a couple, right? Maybe a couple of them in the future, because it's this is too important. It's too important. I mean, we have to go back to it.
I mean, I also had like a couple, like, so why is this important? It gives us warnings of the left brain tilt. It gives you personal insight, people insight. It opens a wealth of understanding of history and tradition. It might help mitigate the arguably serious trouble of our times. And it makes it easy to detect the excesses of the left brain and also self-correct by habit for yourself. So
that's a great list. That's a great list. There's also because there are so many more examples and perspectives that the author worked on. I think it took him a long time, right, to write this book.
Yeah, well, he says something like 30 years, more or less, with research and gradually coming towards the what he. It's funny, if you ask people who work like healthcare workers, if they work with stroke patients, they will just confirm so much of this. Like, yeah, these people, they eat half of their plate with food, and then they sit there and say, "I've eaten all of it," and say, "Yeah, but look, half of it's full of food."
Only if the right brain is damaged, but if the left brain is damaged, they will finish the food, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's
so this has been known knowledge for
so mind-blowing.
So yeah.
Well, again, Richard, I'm still incredibly thankful for you for making me discover this book. I'm almost like, where have I been? Because it's been published 10 years ago or so.
Yeah, well, I am again thrilled that it resonates with you, because of both because the more people that read it, the better, and also that I can have these discussions with you that I just love having. So that's and having more and more, because this keeps seeping into your whole, like, your metaphysics or your whole way of experiencing. It becomes a permanent kind of, sheds a light on so many things, and it makes so many.
He's the perfect Rosetta Stone. He's our future Rosetta Stone for sure.
Yeah.
So, Richard, good night to you, and a good rest of my day to me.
You too. Thanks so much for having me also.